Egypt's temple walls are covered with names: kings, gods, officials, defeated enemies. But one name, central to the Bible's story of Egypt, has never been found in any surviving Egyptian inscription: Moses. Not erased, not scratched out by a later ruler, although Egyptians sometimes did erase the names and images of people they condemned. As far as we can tell, never written there at all. And in Egypt, names mattered. To place your name in stone was to push back against death. To destroy a name was to attack a person's memory. No surviving Egyptian monument describes 10 plagues. No known royal text records an army being swallowed by the sea. No surviving Egyptian document describes the mass departure told in Exodus. But that is only half the mystery, because the Bible does not name the king either. The book of Exodus gives us Joseph, Aaron, Miriam. It even names 2 Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, 2 women who would have meant nothing to the Egyptian state. Then the story reaches the king of Egypt and simply calls him Pharaoh. A title, not a personal name. The story remembers the midwives. It leaves the king anonymous. And one question has followed that story for centuries. Who was the pharaoh? Before I give you the name almost everyone repeats, decide on your answer, because most people choose the same man, Ramesses II, and there is a real reason for that. Exodus says the Israelites built 2 store cities, Pithom and Ramses. Pi-Ramesses was a real royal city in the eastern Nile Delta. Ramesses II made it his capital, and the city's name appears in the Old Testament as Ramses. So the Bible names a city connected to Ramesses. Archaeologists have identified and excavated its remains. That sounds like the answer. But look carefully at what the evidence actually says. The city carries Ramesses' name. The pharaoh in the story does not. A city name can tell us where a story is set, or when its wording took shape. By itself, it cannot identify the king sitting on the throne. Ramesses fits the atmosphere. He fits the geography. He definitely fits Hollywood, but history needs more than a familiar face, and this is where Egypt's own records become difficult. Ramesses fought the Hittite Empire at the Battle of Kadesh. He returned home and covered temple walls with a version of the battle that made him look almost superhuman. Alone, surrounded, saved by his own courage and the favor of the gods. But Hittite evidence and the political outcome of the battle tell a less triumphant story. Most historians see Kadesh as something close to a draw, or at least not the overwhelming Egyptian victory shown on the walls. That does not make Egyptian inscriptions useless. It means they were not neutral reports. They were royal monuments. They were designed to protect the image of the king. So yes, a pharaoh would not be expected to carve a humiliating disaster onto his own temple, but that only explains why a defeat might be missing. It does not prove that the Exodus happened. Absence of evidence is not a cover-up. It is just absence, and I would rather tell you that than sell you a certainty we do not have. So what evidence do we actually have? There is a papyrus in the Brooklyn Museum. It is a legal and administrative record involving a Theban noblewoman named Merneptah Stele and 95 household servants. The museum says that 45 of those servants had names indicating an Asiatic origin. People from the Levant, and then one name appears on the list: Shiphrah. Scholars have compared that name with Shiphrah, the name of one of the 2 midwives in Exodus, the same Shiphrah the Bible remembers, while leaving Pharaoh anonymous. It is a striking parallel. But now comes the part many channels would hide. This is not the biblical Shiphrah. The papyrus dates to roughly the 18th century before the Common Era. That is centuries before Ramesses II, and centuries before the dates usually proposed for the Exodus. A shared name is not a shared identity. Names travel across languages, borders, and generations. Finding a Shiphrah in ancient Egypt proves she was the midwife of Exodus about as well as finding a Robert in medieval England proves New Yorkers lived there. So what does this papyrus actually show? It shows that people from the Levant really lived in Egypt. Some served in Egyptian households. Some carried West Semitic names that sound familiar to readers of the Bible. But the papyrus does not call them Israelites. It does not mention Moses. It does not describe an escape. It gives us a real historical setting. It does not prove the biblical event. And before we go any further, notice the distance between the dates. The Brooklyn Papyrus comes roughly 5 centuries before Ramesses. The Merneptah Stele comes just after his reign. These objects are often placed beside one another in arguments about the Exodus, but they do not come from the same moment in Egyptian history. And then there is the stone. Around 1207 before the Common Era, Pharaoh Merneptah, a son and successor of Ramesses II, raised a granite victory stele. Most of it is exactly what you would expect. Conquest, boasting, enemies crushed. Near the end is a list of places and peoples defeated in Canaan, and in that list appears one word: Israel. The signs beside the name do not mark Israel as a city or a kingdom. They mark it as a people, a group. The Merneptah Stele is widely accepted as the earliest secure mention of Israel outside the Bible, and the first secure external record of Israel is an Egyptian king claiming, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more." That is one of archaeology's great ironies. Israel first enters the surviving record inside a victory speech announcing its destruction. The boast failed. The name survived. That inscription is more than 3,000 years old. The people it declared destroyed are still here. But the stele does not describe an exodus. It does not mention Moses. It simply tells us that by the late 13th century before the Common Era, a people called Israel already existed in Canaan. Already there. And when archaeologists study how early Israel emerged, they do not see clear evidence of one enormous foreign population arriving all at once. Many see early Israel developing largely from people already living in Canaan, especially communities in the highlands, with identities forming and changing over time. The details are debated, but the archaeological picture is more complicated than one nation appearing in a single dramatic moment. Does that make every memory of Egypt meaningless? Not necessarily. Some scholars have suggested that a smaller group with a real connection to Egypt may have joined communities already living in Canaan, and that its escaped tradition later became part of Israel's shared identity. Other scholars explain the Egyptian memory differently. We do not have direct evidence that identifies such a group, we cannot date it, we cannot trace its root, and we still cannot name its king. So let me say plainly what this video is not claiming. We cannot prove that the Exodus happened exactly as the Bible describes it. We cannot confidently identify its pharaoh. No known Egyptian document names Moses. And no. The Israelites did not build the pyramids at Giza. The Great Pyramids were built around 2600 before the Common Era, more than 1200 years before Ramesses II. They were already ancient monuments in his lifetime. Ramesses' own son, Pi-Ramesses, became famous for restoring monuments from Egypt's distant past. But here is what the evidence does show. People from the Levant lived and worked in Egypt. A royal city called Pi-Ramesses existed in the eastern delta. And by about 1207 before the Common Era, an Egyptian king had carved the name Israel into stone. Real Egypt, real Levantine people inside it. A real people called Israel in Canaan. And no surviving document that connects all three. Everything we want to know sits inside that gap. Egypt built a civilization obsessed with preserving memory, stone monuments, royal names, victories meant to last forever. Yet no surviving Egyptian source gives us Moses. Meanwhile, the Israelite tradition kept Egypt at the center of its origin story, and carried that memory across centuries. Maybe the deepest mystery is not why Egypt forgot Moses. Maybe it is why Israel never forgot Egypt. Earlier I asked you to guess the pharaoh. Ramesses is the name most people reach for. Was it your answer? After everything we have seen, does the king's name still matter? Or is the deeper story that a memory survived, where an empire's records went silent?